in the merger that took place.
Which merger? You've listed many.
Involving American Express GBT. I understand that Brian Ballard, longtime backer and head of the law firm where you worked, was instrumental in lobbying the Justice Department to drop that lawsuit. It was dismissed, so it's not subject to a court review. What conversation did you have with Mr. Ballard?
Senator Blumenthal, I cannot believe that you would accuse me of impropriety when you lied about your military service.
I am
you
not
lied.
asking
You
you.
admitted you
I am
lied
not
to be
accusing you
elected
of
a U.S. senator.
I'm
You
asking
lied.
you
How
about
dare you? I'm a
conversations
career prosecutor.
with Mr.
Don't you
Ballard,
ever challenge my integrity.
had
I have
apparently-
abided by every ethics standard. Do not question my ability to be fair and impartial as Attorney General, and anything
You'll
with
answer that
my
question to
former
another of my
firm,
colleagues.
Ballard Partners.
Thank you.
You are not imagining the tension radiating from Washington, D.C. tonight. What began as a routine hearing has rapidly descended into a historic confrontation between the Department of Justice and the United States Congress. The primary figure at the center of this storm is Attorney General Pam Bondi, who recently found herself in a heated exchange in a federal courtroom. During these proceedings, questions arose regarding a specific merger involving American Express GBT and the role of Brian Ballard. Ballard, a longtime supporter and head of the law firm where Bondi previously worked, was reportedly instrumental in lobbying the Justice Department to drop a lawsuit related to this merger, a case that was eventually dismissed without court review. When Senator Richard Blumenthal challenged Bondi on these connections, her response was visceral and defensive. She sharply criticized the senator, accusing him of impropriety regarding his own military record and asserting that her integrity as a career prosecutor should never be questioned. This public friction, however, was merely a prelude to a far more explosive crisis involving the Jeffrey Epstein Files. Despite her vocal promises of transparency and claims of possessing tens of thousands of videos, Bondi is now being accused of stonewalling the very institutions she has sworn to cooperate with. The stakes have reached an unprecedented level as Trump's Attorney General now faces credible threats of jail time, fines, and detention. On December 19, 2025, Representative Ro Khanna issued a direct warning. Any individual attempting to hide or alter the government records tied to the Epstein case would be subject to legal prosecution. The deadline for the complete production of these unredacted files was set for that Friday, and as Bondi missed the mark, Congress began preparing inherent contempt proceedings. This is no longer a partisan drama. There is deep, bipartisan frustration within Congress as both Democrats and Republicans demand to know who was involved with Jeffrey Epstein. The question that every observer is now asking is simple yet terrifying. What is Bondi hiding that is worth risking her career and her freedom? Tonight, we begin a deep dive into how a presidency that promised to drain the swamp now finds its top law enforcement officer facing potential imprisonment for allegedly protecting the very elites the public wants exposed. To understand the gravity of this legal standoff, we must examine the specific evidence, or lack thereof, that has triggered this unprecedented crisis. In early 2025, Pam Bondi made a staggering public statement that sent shockwaves through the international community. She claimed there were tens of thousands of videos of Jeffrey Epstein involving children or child pornography. This claim suggested that the Epstein scandal was exponentially worse and more extensive than anyone had previously imagined. However, this explosive narrative was quickly undercut by internal Justice Department documents and seasoned investigators who stated they were aware of no such vast video trove. This massive discrepancy forces a grim calculation. Either the Attorney General was lying to create political cover, she was dangerously misinformed, or she was strategically inflating expectations to manipulate the public's eventual reaction to heavily redacted files. This potential manipulation of evidence has united lawmakers from both sides of the aisle, turning a partisan skirmish into a full-scale institutional revolt. Lawmakers are now drafting a resolution for inherent contempt against Bondi for her continued defiance of congressional demands. While political pressure is a constant in Washington, inherent contempt is regarded as the nuclear option. Historically, this constitutional authority allows Congress to enforce compliance using its own power. bypassing the Justice Department entirely. This mechanism includes the imposition of escalating daily fines and even the detention of officials who refuse to comply. Representative Ro Khanna's warning was explicit and recorded on December 19, 2025. Anyone attempting to hide or alter these files will be subject to legal prosecution. The central question remains, why would Trump's Attorney General risk actual jail time and a historic legal confrontation to protect documents she once promised to make public? She positioned herself as the one who would finally drain the swamp by exposing elite corruption, yet she is now the primary barrier to that exposure. The conclusion many observers are arriving at is that the unredacted files contain information so politically devastating, potentially implicating Donald Trump himself through his documented social connections to Epstein, that Bondi has every incentive to bury them, regardless of the personal legal risk. As the Friday deadline passed without compliance, the narrative of a cover-up in real time has become impossible to ignore. What makes this situation particularly alarming is the duality of Pam Bondi's actions as the nation's top law enforcement officer. While she is actively stonewalling Congress on the Epstein records, she is simultaneously rolling out a sweeping and aggressive conspiracy investigation aimed directly at Donald Trump's perceived political enemies. Her Justice Department is now targeting officials from the Obama-Biden administrations and the original investigators of the Russia probe, individuals who Trump has long claimed treated him unfairly. This creates a chilling narrative, a Justice Department that is being weaponized to prosecute opponents while concurrently being used as a shield to bury evidence that could implicate the president in one of the century's most sordid scandals. This is a textbook example of what many across the political spectrum describe as gross corruption and a systemic abuse of power. The irony is not lost on observers that Bondi is using the very transparency she promised for the Epstein case as a smokescreen for these political prosecutions. By prosecuting Trump's enemies and covering up potential connections to Jeffrey Epstein, she is essentially redefining the role of the Attorney General as a personal legal defense for the White House rather than a protector of the rule of law. This double standard is precisely why citizens, regardless of their political affiliation, are expressing growing outrage. Furthermore, this strategy is beginning to backfire within Trump's own coalition. A significant portion of the MAGA base genuinely believed the promises of draining the swamp and exposing the deep-seated corruption of the global elite. These supporters were the ones most eager to see the unredacted Epstein files, hoping to see the powerful finally held accountable. However, the realization that Bondi is stonewalling, potentially to protect Trump himself, has led some prominent MAGA voices to speak out. They are starting to ask why the administration looks like it is protecting the very elites it promised to take down. This internal disillusionment could have profound political consequences, as the narrative of accountability is replaced by the reality of institutional self-protection. The legal battleground has now shifted toward the specific mechanisms by which Congress can enforce its oversight authority against a defiant Attorney General. While the public is often familiar with criminal contempt, the situation involving Pam Bondi has brought a far more potent and rare legal tool to the forefront: inherent contempt. Usually, when a government official defies a subpoena, Congress makes a criminal contempt referral to the Justice Department. However, this process becomes fundamentally paralyzed when the target is the head of that very department. It is highly unlikely that the Justice Department would choose to prosecute its own boss, effectively allowing an Attorney General to operate with perceived impunity. To break this stalemate, lawmakers are turning to the nuclear option of inherent contempt, a power derived directly from the U.S. Constitution that allows Congress to act as its own enforcement body. Unlike criminal contempt, which requires the cooperation of the executive branch, inherent contempt allows the House or Senate to use its own authority to find, fine, or even detain individuals who refuse to comply with legitimate demands for information. The bipartisan resolution being drafted on December 23, 2025, represents a significant escalation in this effort. This resolution would authorize formal enforcement actions, which historically have included the sergeant-at-arms physically detaining a defiant official until they comply with congressional orders. This historic confrontation places Pam Bondi in an essentially impossible legal and political position. She is caught between a legislative branch that is increasingly willing to exercise its full constitutional power and an executive branch that appears determined to keep the Epstein files buried at any cost. If Congress follows through on these threats, Bondi will be forced to choose between personal legal consequences, including massive daily fines and potential detention, or complying with the subpoena and potentially exposing evidence that could implicate the president. The broader implications for the American democracy are profound. This fight is no longer just about the Epstein files, it is a stress test for the entire system of checks and balances. If an executive branch official can successfully ignore congressional oversight with no fear of retribution, then the separation of powers ceases to exist in any functional way. The outcome of this standoff will determine whether the president and his inner circle are truly subject to the law, or whether they can effectively operate as an elected monarchy immune to the inquiries of the people's representatives. Let's examine the most suspicious element of this entire saga, the shifting numbers and what we can call the phantom evidence. In early 2025, Pam Bondi didn't just promise transparency, she dropped a bombshell that captured the world's attention. She claimed there were tens of thousands of videos of Jeffrey Epstein involving the exploitation of children. This wasn't a casual remark. It was a definitive figure that redefined the gravity of the case. However, this is where the narrative takes a dark, manipulative turn. By July 7, 2025, Justice Department documents and seasoned investigators began a public walkback, stating they were aware of no such vast video trove in the official records. This massive discrepancy forces every citizen to ask a cynical but necessary question. Was the nation's top law enforcement officer intentionally misleading the public? If Bondi claimed tens of thousands of videos existed to set a massive expectation, only to later produce a fraction of that, it creates a psychological curiosity gap that is easily exploited. By setting the bar impossibly high, any eventual release that is smaller or heavily redacted feels like a disappointing technicality rather than a systemic failure of justice. It is a strategic, overpromise and underdeliver tactic, potentially used to bury the most damaging records under the guise that they simply do not exist. The deception extends beyond the videos to the infamous client list. Recall Bondi's early 2025 suggestions that a list was literally sitting on her desk, ready for review. Yet, a formal DOJ memorandum later found no incriminating client list existed in the investigative holdings. This is exactly why Representative Ro Khanna has stated that Bondi has lost all credibility. You cannot claim a document is in your possession one day and then issue a formal report months later saying it never existed without admitting to a cover-up. As of today, January 1, 2026, the narrative from the Justice Department has shifted again. They now claim to be reviewing over 5.2 million files, a staggering increase in scope that conveniently justifies further delays. This tsunami of data serves as the perfect hiding place for the few hundred pages that actually matter: the flight logs, the unredacted names of the elite, and the evidence connecting Mar-a-Lago or the Epstein Islands to criminal activity. Bondi is currently missing the critical December 19th deadline and facing inherent contempt because the truth hidden within those 5.2 million files is clearly worth more than her own freedom. The most significant political development in this saga is not occurring in a courtroom, but within the very movement that brought this administration to power. For years, the Drain the Swamp movement was built on a singular, powerful promise: the total exposure of the protected elite and the dismantling of a two-tiered system of justice. However, as Pam Bondi continues her high-stakes stonewalling of the Epstein files, a visible fracture is appearing within the MAGA coalition. This is no longer just a narrative driven by the mainstream media or political opponents. It is becoming a crisis of faith for the most loyal supporters of the president. Many within the base view the Epstein case as the ultimate litmus test for the administration's integrity. To these voters, Jeffrey Epstein represents the physical manifestation of the swamp, a wealthy, connected individual who exploited the vulnerable while being protected by powerful friends. They expected Pam Bondi, as Trump's Attorney General, to be the one to finally tear down the veil of secrecy. Instead, they are witnessing an Attorney General who is using the full weight of the Justice Department to bury unredacted records, miss congressional deadlines, and risk inherent contempt charges. This has triggered what some analysts are calling a MAGA civil war. On one side are the loyalists who believe Bondi must protect the president at all costs, even if it means keeping the Epstein files sealed. On the other side is a growing and vocal faction of the base that feels deeply betrayed. They are starting to ask the dangerous question: If this administration is willing to hide the truth to protect its own, how is it any different from the elites they were sent to Washington to replace? This disillusionment is being amplified by prominent MAGA voices who are warning that protecting the powerful is a betrayal of the movement's core values. The political implications for the 2026 midterms are immense. If the enthusiasm of the base wanes because they feel the drain the swamp promise was a hollow marketing tactic, the administration loses its most potent political weapon. Democrats are already preparing to use Bondi's stonewalling as a centerpiece of their campaign, framing the Republican Party as the protectors of the Epstein legacy. For many voters, the sight of a sitting attorney general facing jail time to hide evidence is the ultimate proof that the swamp hasn't been drained. It has simply changed management. History has a haunting way of repeating itself, especially when the walls of a cover-up begin to crack. To understand the peril Pam Bondi faces today, on January 1st, 2026, we must look back to the only other time the nation's top law enforcement officer chose loyalty to a president over the mandate of the law. The ghost of John Mitchell, Richard Nixon's Attorney General, looms large over the current Justice Department. Mitchell eventually served 19 months in federal prison for conspiracy and obstruction of justice, proving that the title of Attorney General is not a shield against the consequences of a systemic cover-up. In 1974, the battle was over audio tapes. In 2026, the battle is over the Epstein Files, but the legal anatomy of the betrayal remains identical. However, there is one critical difference that makes Bondi's position even more precarious than Mitchell's. During Watergate, Nixon was fighting judicial subpoenas. Today, Bondi is in direct violation of a specific federal law, the Epstein Files Transparency Act, which President Trump himself signed on November 19, 2025. This law gave the DOJ a strict 30-day window to declassify and release all records. By missing the December 19th deadline and claiming that 5.2 million files still require review, the DOJ isn't just being slow, it is actively breaking a statute. This is why the 119th Congress is moving toward the nuclear option of inherent contempt. Unlike the slow-moving court battles of the past, inherent contempt allows the House to bypass the judicial system and the DOJ's own refusal to prosecute itself. The White House is relying on a December 20, 2024, opinion from the Office of Legal Counsel, which argues that Congress cannot arrest executive branch officials who are following a president's order to withhold information. But legal scholars note that this defense crumbles when the withholding violates a law that was passed with a veto-proof, bipartisan majority. We are witnessing a historic stress test of American institutions. If a bipartisan coalition led by Representatives Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie can successfully fine or detain a sitting attorney general, it will signal the end of executive impunity. But if Bondi successfully stonewalls until the public loses interest, the Epstein Files Transparency Act will become nothing more than a hollow piece of paper, and the shadow of the Saturday Night Massacre will once again darken the halls of Washington. The endgame is no longer about the ghost of Jeffrey Epstein. It is about the survival of the American legal hierarchy and the integrity of the Office of the Attorney General. As we stand at this precipice on January 1, 2026, Pam Bondi's legacy is being written in the ink of defiance. The hidden truth she is allegedly exposing through her stonewalling isn't just a list of names. It is a confession that the system is currently designed to protect the architect, not the architect's victims. If the 119th Congress successfully executes the inherent contempt resolution, we will witness a spectacle unseen for over a century. A sitting attorney general facing detention to prevent the sun from shining on the darkest corners of elite corruption. The ultimate bombshell in this crisis is the realization that the cover-up itself has become more damaging than the secrets it was intended to hide. By choosing to shield the unredacted files, Bondi has inadvertently confirmed the public's worst fears, that the swamp is not being drained but merely reinforced with new layers of executive secrecy. Whether she is acting on direct orders from the White House or attempting to preserve a political alliance, the cost is the same: the total erosion of public trust in the Department of Justice. The Trump defense is cracking in D.C. because you cannot run a government on the promise of transparency while simultaneously treating government records like private property. This is where you, the viewer, become the final check and balance. The politicians in Washington will only follow through on these threats of jail time and fines if they feel the heat of public demand. They are counting on you to lose interest, to get distracted by the next news cycle, and to accept the redacted spin as the final truth. But the Epstein scandal is the one issue that refuses to die because it represents the ultimate betrayal of the American people by their leaders. If Bondi is allowed to defy a bipartisan federal law with impunity, then the rule of law is officially a relic of the past. Subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell immediately, because as this Friday deadline passes and the contempt proceedings begin, we will be the ones bringing you the unredacted truth without corporate spin. Share this video with someone who still believes the swamp is being drained. They need to see exactly how the cover-up is happening in real time. The truth is coming, and no amount of stonewalling can keep it buried forever. I'll see you in the next update.